The Tony Gebhardt Show. Music, motivation, and positively obnoxious. Welcome to the Tony Gebhardt Show, and I just want to thank everyone for coming to check things out. Music, motivation, and positively obnoxious. Really excited. The podcast really is here to unveil different individuals and stories of perseverance through adversity, as well as people with disabilities. I myself, my name is Tony Gebhardt. I'm 26 years old. I live in Alaska, and I work in assistive technology and youth transition services. So working a lot with youth and providing them an opportunity for social and work opportunities. And I must say, just for fun, this is the third attempt at recording this. I mean, there's not one thing, there's another. But season 1 of the podcast, the Tony Gebhardt Show, is going to be quite a few guests of friends of mine and people who've been huge influencers and inspirations to a lot of people in their fields, all who are disabled in one way or another with a visual impairment. Today, specifically, we're going to be spotlighting an individual. His name is Nate Kile. He's a great friend of mine, a motivator, an entrepreneur, an athlete, and quite a few things. He's a man of many trades, but has been able to remain wise and humble through his life experiences. So we're going to check that out and see what he has to say. But before we get to that interview, I got to tell you about a really cool audio game that I recently got my hands on, and it's called Scramble. Yes, Scramble, kind of based off the old arcade game, and the whole point of the game is to get points, not get hit by rocks, don't fall into the pit of lava, and make sure you go up those ladders and get those special bonuses and power-ups, because I'm going to tell you, it's going to be addictive, it's going to be a lot of fun, and you're going to spend many hours trying your hardest to beat your last high score. I know I have, and I've been playing this game already for 24 hours. Made by an amazing programmer with pro grammar. His name is Stephen D. You can get the game at stephend.net and have a lot of fun with it. So, what are you doing? Stop wasting your time, go play the game, and support the developer. Here we are. This is the Tony Gebhardt Show, and this is episode 2, which if I made it past the pilot, I feel like we're doing something good. Music, motivation, and being positively obnoxious, as you know, is the tagline, and I'm just really excited because today I'm joined by a good friend, a mentor, my supervisor, and really just a guy of many trades. He's an entrepreneur, he's done many things, and he's totally blind just like myself. And everybody, I just want to welcome Nate Kile to the show. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well, and in the words of anyone who's ever coded, hello world.
Hello world. Ah, okay. Very good. You know, it's crazy. We've been on this kick with this open AI thing, and like just the last 3 days alone, I've somehow conjured the interest of Python, when normally I don't even have the the memorization abilities with thousands of lines of code. So.
Oh yeah, it's inspiring and motivating to have something new, a new interest that propels us to other interests.
Oh, it really does.
That's
I mean,
AI has done.
And it's assistive, you know, in a lot of ways that we can do some research and it'll guide us along the way while giving us examples. And not only that, but the machine learning capabilities that this artificial intelligence actually has can really drive technology, especially for blind people, into the next, I think, the next millennium.
Absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show is, you know, to really spotlight what it means to grow through adversity, right? That's one of the things that I kind of spotlight on the podcast, and really what I want to do for this first season is really bring people in who've not only been an inspiration to me, but really what does it mean to persevere, right? And as some of you may know, you know, Nate and I do work together, and I came up with this acronym a while ago, right? Tenacity, advocacy, perseverance, and empathy. Tape, you know, tape it on. And I don't know, just as more time goes on, I think a lot of those words have such a meaning in our lives, and I'm wondering what those mean to you, and if you were willing to tell a little bit of your story and where you came from.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, perseverance and tenacity and all of, and these things that go along with our growth as we move forward, as we develop, as we we try to find a space where we're investigating who we are, we're exploring ourselves along with the world around us, and kind of in the midst of all of these external influences, we're trying to figure out what our own identity is going to look like. And of course, it's knitted together with experiences, with people around us, with our history, with our hopes and our goals for the future, and it's really continuing to take a step forward. It's not giving up. It's not throwing in the towel. The willingness to grow is one of our characteristics as humans. It's growing in awareness that separates us from other animals, from other the things that we at least know on this earth, is our awareness of things.
Sure.
And so I desire to take that gift of being aware, the gift I have of my thoughts, of my physical abilities, my emotions, and grow them.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the gift of being aware. I like how you phrase it that way. Do you think having that level of awareness can, in a lot of ways, can it ensue humility?
Well, I think that's the hope.
Right.
That is the hope, is to, and when we say humility, I know you and I are on the same page, and for some people they think, well, I don't want to be humiliated. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about a humbleness that comes from acknowledging that you do have gifts, you do have abilities, but not bragging about them, not being arrogant or cocky like we can see manifested a lot. Because I think in the humility of recognizing our gifts, we open up the door for more growth.
Sure.
We plow more of the field to plant more seeds and to nurture them and to grow in all of those areas.
So, this kind of wisdom doesn't just come from the ether, right? You've had years of making mistakes and trying new businesses and opening up, a cafe, training dogs, doing a lot of things. Walk us through just a snippet of how many businesses you've started and have either failed or you just moved on from, and what is that in of itself? What does that tell about that kind of wisdom and how you learn from those mistakes?
Wisdom, and also a resolute stubbornness comes
right,
in there.
Right.
And so I'm gonna go into, but keep in mind as I share this, I couldn't recognize everything that was going on throughout the journey. It's easier to sit here now in the cheap seat and formulate these pearls of wisdom, but that's all hindsight.
Right. Hindsight is 20/20.
It definitely is.
Right.
And so I was a young person, your age, early 20s, and I had a family. I had children. I was blind. At that point, all I had was a GED. I had very little education, but I did have a drive, and curiosity has always been something that's always steered me to learn about new things. And so with that pursuit, the first business that I had was when I was 26, and it was a printing business. It was called Alpha Printing, and it was printing with stuff like heat presses, decals,
and T-shirts and all that.
T-shirts,
sure.
Hoodies.
And you were doing this blind.
Blind,
right,
yes.
Right.
And I had to learn, because the people who I brought on the team, they didn't know anything about it. They were just willing to help. They just wanted to be involved in the business. And so I'm learning everything that has to do with all of these vinyls, rolls of vinyl, vinyl cutters, heat presses, the timing for different types of materials, different kinds of things that the textures of these designs you'd put on clothing, what feels quality, what does not, the
right.
shirts, all of those things went into that. And so I ran that for a couple of years. We had some contracts with teams to do their jerseys. We did some decals for people's cars, on the back of their windows they may have a saying or rest in peace for someone to commemorate their life.
Sure.
So that was intro.
Your introduction really into being an entrepreneur, right? And that's your chance to make all the mistakes.
It was, but you know, and I'm going to say, let me actually flip back because that was the first formal business. Informally, I actually started flipping cars from car auctions.
Okay, under the table, right?
There's whatever, you know. You just make things happen at that point. That's what I felt I needed to do, was just flip the cars. And so I'd go to the auction. I'd have someone with me, a family member, spouse at that time, or you know, some other friends, and we'd go there. And I would go on Craigslist, and I created my own list. This is years ago. This is 17, 18 years ago.
Early
and
Craigslist.
I would say, okay, I'd get all these kind of cars that would, you know, were popular at that time, and I'd say these are the prices that a 1999 Thunderbird is selling for. And then I might do some Blue Book searches with the Kile Blue Book. I'd go to the auction, find some cars, and say, okay, I know that that car is selling on Craigslist for way more than it's being bid at. So maybe I picked a car up for $500. We got it home. I'm able to do basic things, you know, change out starters, oil changes, change batteries, get in there and vacuum and clean it out. And then I would write a pretty stellar ad.
Right.
And then someone would come by and test drive it. So I did that for a couple of years, just flipping cars.
Sure. Well, then it takes, you know, just that level of educating yourself and doing your research and, you know, as you said, having a beginner's and maybe an intermediate knowledge of general mechanics and automobiles. And, you know, let me ask you this, kind of, not to segue too much, but, you know, in that early stages of, you know, your blindness and your entrepreneurship, you know, did you have much of a blind mentor around that time, or were you kind of just learning how to do this by yourself?
I was learning to do it all on my own. You know, really, I've been blind since I was 15 years old. I'm now in my 40s, and I haven't been in the blind community until the last 6, 7 years.
Sure. So in a lot of ways you were a lone wolf, right? You know, you took on blindness from your own perspective. And in a lot of ways that's respectable. But, you know, not to segue too much, but this is just some curiosity that's hitting me like wildfire. You know, coming into the blind community so fresh in some aspects, did you feel out of place?
You know, I don't know if out of place would be the right word, because I'm used to just new environments. But you know, yeah, there's definitely been some learning that has taken place. The different outlooks that are within the blind community. There's different layers, different levels, blindisms, patterns, strengths. You know, all of these things that go along with our small demographic, our little sub-society, our culture.
Sure.
And so I'm still learning those things. And in that, I find that some blind people don't even recognize that there are variations. And that's like anything in life. You know, you see through your lens and you think this is the only way. If I'm experiencing this, all people in my situation must be experiencing the same thing, which is not always necessarily true.
Right. And, you know, with growing up through, you know, flipping cars and doing your printing business and all of these things, you know, where I guess, when did you find your true occupational purpose? Like your career? When was that established? Because, you know, I feel like everyone has that momentary, you know, kind of point where they drift, going from one odd job to the next. You know, I was cleaning parks for a little while. Then I was a camp counselor for a little while. You know, and doing things of that nature. So, you know, it took me a while to find my career. But how long did it take you to find this? You know, what you feel natural at?
Yeah, well, it took me about 4 decades for it to crystallize, and so you're about 20 years ahead of me. And you know, learning all the skills, you know, the businesses. I've had the vending business. I've had a convenience store. I've had a couple project recording studios, and so there's a lot of skill sets that I picked up in there. But I think the one thing that stands out to me now in hindsight are a couple things. One is, you know, I do have the ability to communicate. And so that's something that has been pointed out to me in my life, even when I was younger. And then, but in that communication, you take it one step further, and then there's this pattern that emerged of me understanding that I do have the ability to take things that may seem complex to somebody and explain them in a way that they can understand very well.
Sure. No, and I can attest to that. It's definitely been very apparent in the last 3 years that you and I have had a chance to be side by side in our agency and kind of growing with one another. You know, when I feel like I have an issue or I'm running into an obstacle that I just cannot wrap my head around, I know there's some form of just connecting the dots from a different concept or different perspective. And I think that just, you know, that seems to be a repeating metaphor that echoes when we talk is, what's the perspective, right? How can we look at this in a different way instead of sticking to an opinion?
Yes.
Right? You know,
You capture that very well.
Right.
Others' perspective over sticking to an opinion.
Right, exactly. And you know, I think there's justifications there where morals, beliefs, and values should be upheld depending on what they are, right? You know, we all know that murder is bad, but we also know war in some aspects has to happen for this to happen over this, you know, things of that nature. So I think it's all perspective.
Sure.
And how it's approached. So I always find that really interesting and a very common theme that comes up when you and I talk and get together. So
yeah,
that's really interesting.
Well, and I'll say another part of it that's been in my compass and the wind in my sails is, you know, just being a learner, reading lots of books.
Yeah.
So even though I haven't had a lot of direct mentors, I've been immersed in books on leadership, books on teaching, you know, just going through and understanding different aspects of history and psychology, sociology, philosophy. All of those things have added to who I am, and always trying to pull out the practical part of those things. And I don't just want to be a knowledge animal, a knowledge vulture. I want to find out where these things can be applied.
Sure.
So
the why.
The why, and I want to be. I want my skills and my time and my acquisition of this knowledge to be relevant.
Right.
Relevant to the world around me and impacting others' lives.
Right. It's not like you're going out and watching a documentary on dinosaurs because it's dinosaurs. Like you would want to know what makes that important or what makes this important, right? And how can you put that in pieces of your life to drive you to your next destination, if you will.
Yes.
Right. And I kind of like it, and I know there's a lot of people that can say that books are a lot of people's mentors. Mm-hmm. You know, I myself can say that for sure. You know, reading autobiographies from some of my favorite musicians and really looking at their life and how they've overcome addiction and abuse from childhood or substance or alcohol, just, you know, depending what the, but watching them grow through it, you know, I feel like I can learn so much from my own personal stories of battling with those things. And I can tell, like, okay, I'm not alone here. How do they cope with it? How do other people deal with it? You know, I need to see how other people deal with adverse situations so that I can understand more in depth on how I could approach it with mine. Because there's no one way that fixes all. You know, one size doesn't fit all, right? In a lot of ways, because everyone's so vastly different on how they go about their lives, and especially within the blindness community, on how many different walks of life that there is, both, you know, culturally and behaviorally and intellectually even, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I want to address something that I've noticed in my life and into the blind community, which wasn't something that I really encountered before. And, you know, there are a lot of mixed feelings about being the amazing disabled person, the amazing blind person. And
sure. Oh, you're so inspirational.
Yeah, and you know, my perspective, or it's a continually growing perspective, is that whether we like it or not, we're gonna represent something as individuals, and more so in having a disability.
Right.
So it's for better or for worse. And my thing is, I've been inspired by people, by nature, by things, by thoughts, by poems. And so if I know how much that I've gleaned off of being inspired by people who maybe didn't even realize they were inspiring me, I don't mind if somebody wants to use me for an inspiration, because life, it can be hard, it can be tricky and challenging, and so the more inspiration out here, the better.
Yeah, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
I understand it's easy to feel self-conscious, and it's easy to not want to be in that spotlight, but it will continue to happen.
Sure.
And so for me, that helps push me to be more thoughtful and more intentional about my life, the things I do, the things I say.
Yeah.
Because I'm representing blind people, I'm representing minority, I'm representing someone who's middle-aged. We're always representing something.
Yeah.
And
100%.
Sometimes we choose to. We say, well, I want you to hear my voice. I want you to hit like on my Facebook post. And then when we're out, we're saying, but no, don't look at me now.
Yeah.
Don't
right.
like or not like on my life. So we want to pick and choose, but we're going to be in the spotlight.
Sure. Well, you're in the public eye. You're it's depending on what agency or occupation or just what that looks like. Either way, whether we like to admit it or not, there is a representation there based on our behavior and our actions, right?
So Finn is over here licking my fingers because I was just, for those of you who don't know, I was just cooking. So I was cooking this food in this Instapot air fryer. And so Finn, the Labradoodle, is over here licking my fingers.
We always got to include the dogs in videos.
Yeah, so we have, in maybe it's not panned out enough, but we have Huckleberry Finn, Labradoodle pet, and then his brother in a different coat is a service dog, Edgar, who's a black lab laying down by my feet.
Yeah, and both of those dogs are just fantastic. And yes, Nate, you do have a guide dog. You've been a guide dog user for almost 6 years.
Correct. Yes.
Wow, can you believe how old he's getting? And he's still rocking it.
Oh yeah,
he's still kicking it.
Yep.
What was I gonna say? I just had a total brain fart. When it comes to I had something really juicy too. Gosh, I hate that when that happens. It just completely evaporates into thin air. But nonetheless, I really appreciate a conversation like this because, when oh, I knew what I was going to ask you. Going back to the obvious part of us, being representatives of a label or identity, you're a Christian too.
Yes.
So when we think about it, and to everyone who knows, this is not solely a religious podcast, but I do put some of my faith elements into this because I myself am a Christian. When we look at the Bible, we're called. You see those words a lot. You're called to, you're asked to share. And to represent, the people in a lot of ways, and so I think part of that could be manifested in with your faith.
Oh yeah, that's really what undergirds everything I do. I was finished reading a book this morning called Endure by Cameron Haynes, and the question he poses when the chips are down, what keeps you going? When the anxiety strikes, when the fear is there, when you get the call that something terrible has happened, when you're ready to throw in the towel, what keeps you going?
That's a good one.
And so for me, it doesn't have to be when the chips are down, it's just every day. So it's just woven through the fabric of who I am.
Right.
And it has been since I was 21 years old now.
Yeah.
So everything I'm saying, really that's the origin, is through my faith and through navigating the world, my thoughts, interpreting my actions, the actions of others, my passions, loves, have all gone through that lens of my faith.
Yeah. And that's a really big deal, and that's a motivator for you. And, in a lot of ways you could say, God is your mentor.
Absolutely.
God is your mentor. He's, in a lot of ways, and I can recall so many times when you and I have had our own little beefs or something goes on in each other's lives, and one of the things we always come to is, what does it make us as Christians? What does it do for us as brothers of the faith? And how could God instill humility into us to grow not only as Christians, but to help grow our communities, right?
Yeah, for sure. I guess, this the drive, what has gotten me here, what has motivated me, it's being a stepping stone for others.
Right.
You know, it's being the cocoon where somebody is in life where they need help. I come and wrap them up with my gifts, and hopefully when it's done, they're like a butterfly.
Yeah.
Or
There
we're building runways.
Right.
And so, you know, all of those analogies are the things I want to be in the lives of those around me.
That's amazing. Well, why don't we make a quick transition here? You know, a couple questions that come to mind before we wrap this up is, you know, thinking about all of the accomplishments that you've been able to make and where it's gotten you today, as you know, as an individual, as a man, as a Christian, financially, everything in that. You know, what would you say to somebody who is blind in their early 20s? Or maybe in their late teens, who is stuck at home and at a point where they cannot find that motivation. You know, what would be the few choice words?
Choice words.
That's always the tough one.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to, the thing is, I don't want to say anything that's just trite, and you know, that's because it's so paramount. That when you speak to people in that situation, you kind of understand where they're coming from, but also they understand that you've been there.
Right, empathy.
Yeah, it's the empathy, because I don't want to come off sounding harsh. And you know, if I say, well, just persevere, period, that doesn't do a lot. But I do want to say that there are a few things that happen when we're in that place. Our fears grow. And so the fear grows and that's, expect that. But you know, in order to move forward, you have to push through those fears. And those fears, I've seen them, I've felt them, I've worked with tons of people. The idea of maybe going to college, it could be the fear of, I'm not going to be able to get around on campus. Then you go to campus and say, well, I don't want to learn to use a screen reader. And it's, you know, this is for the blind community, but it could be something similar for the sighted community also. But push through those fears, because 9 times out of 10, anyone who you have met who's been successful has experienced those same fears. And there's a saying, and the saying is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I've seen that when we get a client who is ready, they're going. They're moving forward. And then we get a client who's apprehensive, who's suspicious, they usually don't go. They're bringing a lot of fears, they're bringing a lot of baggage, a lot of trauma, and until they can kind of start processing through that and shaking that off and putting some trust and some skin in the game, then it's really, really difficult to move forward. So,
wow,
those are some big things. And the other thing I'm much more aware of now is that we do have a subculture in the blind community that can be a dark place. And so it's through online, you know, the chat rooms, the team servers, whatever rooms and new spaces there are. Sometimes those areas perpetuate people's fears. People come there and kind of spew a lot of negativity, their bad experiences, unfortunate experiences.
Sure.
And it ends up being a cesspool of negativity. But while it's an outlet and a place of acceptance.
Sure.
Because 2 things can be true. It can be a place where you're accepted, a place where you meet people who you have shared experiences with. But the other side of that truth is that it could be a place that is really toxic.
Yeah, it can be toxic, or you know, it can hold someone down.
Yes.
And bring them, you know, to a very stagnant place. So I think moderation is key in a lot of ways, because, you know, coming from me, you know, in the generation of being a millennial, you know, our lives are populated so much. You know, as I turned 13, technology became, you know, the game, right? Mm-hmm. As a kid, I didn't have much of it, but now it's everything. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. I have online friends. I'm streaming with people from across the world, you know, doing this, and that. And in a lot of ways, when I hear your words, you know, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. And I think at the same time, you know, we have to balance that in person and in the flesh fellowship and genuine connection that we can have with people, and then also, you know, have that time for that digital realm, because in a lot of ways that's becoming our culture. That's becoming our society. Things are changing, things are evolving, And, I think it just boils down to that concept of moderation.
It does.
Yeah.
And outlets and what's, who are you going to be, and are you doing the things that are going to move you into the place of who you envision yourself being? And it's one step at a time. When I'm on this treadmill, sometimes 5, 6, 7 miles in the morning before work, because that's part of who I am now. It's part of who I envision myself as being, somebody who's healthy, who's finding life's balances, and wants to put my priorities first.
Right.
And I can read 1,000 articles about how to do it, but it doesn't start until
you do it.
Yes.
Right. And what's that popular phrase that you always say, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
It's a marathon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It spits that in one of my songs.
Yeah,
So there you go.
yeah, and we're we're full of kind of our quotes and things, our mantras. It's the other one that's really big, and it's so simple, is that it's from Abraham Lincoln, I believe. Is if you think you can,
Henry Ford.
Henry Ford.
Yeah,
yes,
that's Henry Ford.
If you think you can or you think you cannot, you're right.
Because that's your world, right?
Yeah.
That's your world. What you tell yourself is, at the end of the day, I feel like in a lot of ways that's your reality.
It is.
Right? I mean, we could talk on that for hours, but why don't we finish this up? One last thing is, do you have anything you want to tell our blind audience, before we let everything go today?
I want to say that the world that we live in is it's challenging. We have parts of our community on one hand of the spectrum that say we can do anything, we can do everything, and no fear, which is great. But we have to take into account the challenges that are just simply inherently there.
Right.
Where it's depression, it's loneliness, challenges with social situations, with transportation, with networking, with having intimacy. Young people that do want to have a boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever it may have you. Those are real challenges.
Yeah.
And so we don't, as for those who are in leadership roles of organizations, of places, we have to acknowledge that there's challenges, and we have to lean into people's lives. We have to hear them, be empathetic while sending these positive messages, while still trying to encourage people, hold people accountable. And remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but we are part of this community. So, just keep pushing forward. Be positive. Be graceful, gracious, forgiving with yourself, curious about life, and don't give up.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. You guys have a good one. Stay groovy. GreatNonprofits.org is a 501c3 nonprofit. Great Nonprofits helps people focus on making good giving decisions based on socially sourced feedback and reviews. Go to www.greatnonprofits.org and type in your zip code or city to find a charity or nonprofit near you that you can help.